Righty-ho everyone, so let's think about Curly's wife. Please remember that Curly's wife is a character who you want to try and see with some sort of complexity in mind. So we want to look at the positive traits and the negative traits. There are far more negative than positive, but that doesn't mean that we can forget them. And remember, the question might be a show how far question, and therefore it's important to understand the character of Curly's wife in both a positive and negative light. Okay, so let's fire on. Now, remember AO2, thinking about language techniques, thinking about what the writer is doing with language, that has to be the clear focus of your essay. And what we want to do is start off by thinking about Steinbeck and his decision not to give Curly's wife a name. She's only referred to as Curly's wife, and that is because she's dehumanized by this lack of a name. Instead, she's seen as Curly's possession. So she's objectified, she's treated as an object by Steinbeck in relation to the fact that he never gives her her own name. She's just a possession of Curly. And also she is objectified in that whenever we see her, and particularly when we first see her, it's her physicality, it's her body that represents her. And that's because she is just a body to the ranchmen. She is just a body to Curly. There's no understanding that there might be a mind and a heart and a soul. Instead, she is just a body. It's her sexuality that gives her any value here on the ranch. So important things to remember about her in relation to AO2. First of all, that she's objectified, that she's not given a name, and that when she is introduced, it is descriptions relating to her physicality that are put clearly to the forefront. So we have that she breathed strongly, her twitched her body. So breathed and twitched, if you think of those verbs, she's described in relation to verbs, and those verbs are all focused on her body, the only thing that's valued. Okay. Also in relation to AO2, let's think about the first time we see her. So when we see her for that very first time, we've got some symbolism here. Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. So it's her presence on the doorway, or at the doorway rather, that blocks the sunlight. Now, if we think of sunlight in relation to connotations of happiness and hope and optimism, then she blocks that sunlight. And really that is what she does in the novel. She blocks the hope and the happiness that comes from the fact that George and Candy and Lenny working together, that sense of unity that they have developed, working together they can achieve their dream. And it's her death that stops that. It's her death that makes poor Candy realise that he can speak of his greatest fear. And that superlative of her Candy, he speaks of his greatest fear, and that great fear is that they can't get that little place, they can't achieve their dream. So when we see her for the very first time, that rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off, and therefore Steinbeck is using symbolism to suggest that she in some way will be the force that blocks the happiness and the hope and the optimism. I've said here, she craves the spotlight, but her physicality or her character will block the hope and prevent happiness of achieving the dream for George and Lenny, foreshadowing what is to come. I think it's also important that she's always at the doorway. She's at the doorway here of the bunkhouse, and when we see her in chapter 4, she's always at the doorway. She's never in. And that idea that whenever Steinbeck presents her, the only time that she's in anywhere that we see is the barn in chapter 5 when she dies. But when she's trying to find Curly, when we see her come to the bunkhouse door as here, and in chapter 4, she only comes to the threshold, she never comes in. And the key thing is that suggests her isolation, that she's always at the doorway. She's never part of that ranch house life. As violent and as depersonal as that ranch house life is, she can't have a part of it anyway. Why? Because she's a woman, and because she's a possession. She's owned by Curly. So if we look at this description of her, a girl was standing there looking in, referring back to that idea of her at the doorway, always at the threshold. She had full rouged lips and wide spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Okay, so what's Steinbeck doing here? Well, reference to that looking in the doorway, that she's always isolated, she's always apart, she's always separate. But if we look then at the description of her, again, her physicality, focusing on her body, her lips and her eyes and her fingernails, all those things associated with sexuality and the idea of being a sensuous person, a sensuous presence. So we've got the red lips, and it connotes two things: the idea of heat, passion, lust, but also danger, also warning. And that she's heavily made up. She's in full makeup here. What for? Because her life is boring. She's on the ranch. She has no one to talk to. She has nothing to do. So we get this idea that the mundanity or the boring, everyday ordinariness of ranch house life is something that she's not really prepared for. She's inappropriately dressed for this. She's in an inappropriate place for her and for her mentality and for her desires. You get the sense that by dressing up like this, it's her way of it's a performance for her. It's some means of escape, and again, everything is about validating her physicality, making herself look beautiful or sensuous or glamorous, despite the fact that she's in a place where none of those things really matter. She relies on accessorizing to be the person who she wants to be. So she wants to be beautiful and glamorous. She wants to be in the movies. She's stuck on the ranch, but that doesn't stop her dressing in a way that perhaps helps her feel as if those things are attainable. So accessories are important for her, and accessories are important for her husband, and it's a nice little irony that accessories are important to Curley and his wife. It unites, they're both united by the fact that they dress to fulfill their desires, or to be the people that they want to be, not who they are. So they're united in that, but that's probably one of the few things that unites them, because they are never seen together in this novella. Well, the only time that they are together, she's dead, and that's in the barn. So the only time you actually see the two of them together, that they share the same space, is when she's dead. This description of her then, her hair hung in little roll clusters like sausages, and she wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the instep of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. So the cotton dress seems to be an ordinary day wear fashion item for the time, but then look what it's paired with. It's paired with these red ostrich feather mules, and her hair in little clusters like sausages. So again, the ostentatiousness of her dress is something that's made apparent in Steinbeck's presentation of her. And also Steinbeck's presentation of her is not flattering. There is perhaps this comical juxtaposition between a house dress and the full lips and the red ostrich feathers of the sandals. The two things don't quite go, so there's no sense of real style here. But what we also have is the simile of her hair hung in little roll clusters like sausages, and that simile is rather unpleasant. So we have this idea that she appears a little bit unpleasant, and she appears a little bit comic, but not that she's aware of how comic her presence is. She thinks that she's glamorous, she thinks that she's beautiful, but she's just a fish out of water. She's stuck in a place where none of those things matter. "I'm looking for Curley," she said, and her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. He was here a minute ago, but then he went. So again, let's think about the AO2 here and language. So the adjectives, nasal, brittle quality to her voice. Didn't mean to do that, folks. Again, this idea that it's unflattering, it's unappealing, just like the simile. So even though she is glamorous, even though she is heavily made up, she is an unappealing character. Steinbeck is not giving us an unbiased view of her. She appears unappealing. The fact that she's looking for Curley, she's always looking for Curley. That's always her excuse, and you get the sense in relation to that he's always looking for her, she's always looking for him. neither of them care about each other. It's just this idea that's what they say to perhaps give them a purpose. Just as when you think about Candy, Candy has his purpose with the broom. There is a sense of purposelessness that runs throughout the novella. Oh, she put her hands behind her back and leaned against the door frame so that her body was thrown forward. You're the new fellas that just come, ain't you? Now, as I said before, whenever we're thinking about Steinbeck's presentation of her, it's always focused on her physicality and her awareness that the only thing that matters to these men is her physicality. So that she put her hands behind her back and leaned against the doorframe so her body was thrown forward. She knows that the only thing that anyone cares about is her body, and therefore she makes sure that she takes full advantage of that with the full face of makeup, with the red fingernails, with the rouged lips, with the red ostrich feathers. She wants attention. She craves attention. But not because she's a tart. That's where the ranch house men have so little awareness of her. Not because she's a tart. That's how Candy introduces her, and how Candy finally describes her in chapter 5 as a lousy tart. No, because she's lonely. Because she wants connection, because she wants some sort of emotional connection with someone, and the only thing that she's got to use is her body. So the description tells us how deliberate that action is, that her body is her means of gaining attention. It's the only thing that can help her be acknowledged. She's not in the room, she's always looking in, she's at the doorway. So the only thing that she can put out there that will get her attention of any type is her sensuality, is her body. If he ain't, I guess I better look someplace else, she said playfully. Lenny watched her fascinated. George says, if I see him, I'll pass the word you was looking for him. Now, again, AO2, playfully. She's teasing, she's manipulating the situation. What we have here is the idea that she has to play a particular role, and she plays that role well. Remember, when in chapter 5, when she's talking about how she could be in pictures, she said that a man came along and said that she was a natural. And you've got that irony there, because there's nothing natural about her. Everything is playing a role. Speaking playfully in her nasal, brittle voice is playing that role. Putting the makeup on, wearing the ostrich feathers, again, she's playing that role. There is nothing natural about her. And yet she uses that phrase in chapter 5. That's what she said the man who was going to put her in pictures had referred to her as. So Lenny watched her fascinated. She gets what she wants. She wants to be watched. She wants to be looked at there. And the idea that Lenny is fascinated by her sensuality does not bode well for the future. Then we know things are not going to go well. And of course we've had that referred to with her first appearance, when she symbolically blocked out the sunlight. She smiled archly and twitched her body. Nobody can blame a person for looking, she said. There were footsteps behind her going by. She turned her head. Hi, Slim. Slim's voice came through the door. Hi, good looking. I'm trying to find Curly, Slim. Well, you ain't trying very hard. I seen him go into your house. And she hurried away, apprehensive. Bye bye, boy, she called, and she hurried away. Now, the key thing here is, look there, another adverb to describe her. She smiled archly. That idea that she's manipulating, that she's teasing, that she's being playful. So she knows what she's doing. And the little short sentence, she smiled archly and twitched her body. She's being provocative, she's being sensual, she's trying to control how she is seen by the others, because she wants to be seen. But bear that in mind. Look at her reaction when, and Slim tells her what she wants to hear. Hi, good looking. He knows what it is that she wants. She wants to have the fact that she's pretty confirmed by a man. She wants that type of attention, and he gives it to her. Not because he's trying to seduce her or anything like that, but because he understands. He has those godlike eyes. He knows what it is that people look for, and he gives it to them. But beyond that, if you look at her reaction to him when he says that Curly has gone into the house, she was suddenly apprehensive. She called into the bunkhouse and she hurried away. So suddenly apprehensive. So there is that sense of fear. She should be somewhere else. She shouldn't be out at the bunkhouse. She should be in the house. And you have that fear about Curly's actions. It suggests that she's under Curly's control, despite the fact that she's trying to control the situation by being arch, or by smiling archly and twitching her body and speaking playfully. Remember that we know that Curly's pretty handy, so the fear that she has of Curly, the sense of apprehension, it perhaps is something that's quite real for her in a physical way, but we don't know that, so we wouldn't say it. I think it's important that you realise that Curly's wife never really speaks for herself until a little bit in chapter 4, and then most noticeably in chapter 5. So in chapter 1, when she's introduced, or sorry, chapter 2, when she's introduced, we just see her playing that character, playing the sensuous young woman. But in chapter 3, everyone talks about her. She doesn't speak for herself. And when they speak about her, what they do is they talk about her in a prejudiced way. They see her just as she presents herself, just as a physical, sensuous thing. So let's have a look and see what they say. Okay, remember Candy? Candy says Curly's married a tart. The use of the ellipsis there is important. He has that dramatic pause. Remember, that dramatic pause is from the ellipsis. And we would want to tell the examiner that. And what he's doing there is he's creating the drama of his revelation, or there's a moment of hesitancy, because what he's going to say, calling Curly's wife a tart, is quite bitter, it's quite harsh, and after all, he doesn't know George and Lenny, so he has to tread carefully there. This is important with Wit in chapter 3. So Wit refers to her. He said to George, "Have you seen the new kid yet?" Now, I think it's important that Wit refers to her as a new kid, because that's what she is. She's a young woman. She's in her teenage years. And so the idea that she's referred to as a tart, and as a lousy tart, and as jailbait, and all of these derogatory terms used against her. In fact, she's a newly married teenage girl, and we don't even think that the marriage has been consummated, because remember, Curly's got yellow jackets in his drawers and nothing's come of it yet. So the fact that Wit refers to her as a new kid is appropriate, despite the fact that he's unaware of it, that she is young, she is naive. He refers to the fact that she ain't concealing nothing, and that idea that everything about her is show, is performance, that everything's on show. He's thinking about her sexuality, he's thinking about her physical presence, and when he says that she ain't concealing nothing, the use of the double negative there really suggests that everything is a performance, everything's on show, because she knows that's the only thing that's going to get her attention. And then he goes further by saying, "I bet she even gives the stable buck the eye." And by doing that, what he's doing is he is linking to the idea of miscegenation. Now, in the 1930s, the idea that a white woman would look at a black man would be seen as completely abhorrent. It would be seen as the final taboo. It was in certain states of America, it was illegal, and therefore, when he uses that term, what he's suggesting is her overriding sexual power. You know, that she is so full of lust, that she is so sensual and sexual a being, that she would even contemplate having a relationship with a black American. And what he's doing there is imbuing her with perhaps the same sort of sexual desire and cravings that the men feel in the ranch, but of course the only time that they can act upon those is when they pay a woman for it at the cat house. He doesn't know her. He is just buying into the idea of her as a tart, and just as Candy does, just as George picks up on, they don't see the person, they just see the body, and they represent, or they see that body as representing a sexuality, a power that they are in actual fact scared of. Curly's got yellow jackets in his drawers, but that's all so far. But they ain't nothing come of it yet. So what we have here is the idea about how how Curly is anxious to consummate the relationship, but the relationship has not so far been consummated. The key thing here is the salacious interest. Now, salacious means an unhealthy interest in sexual matters, and the ranch house men have the salacious wit. These are both from Wit. Have this salacious interest in Curly and Curly's wife, because they themselves they have natural urges, and they feel that they want the company of a woman in a sexual way. They have to go to the cat house for it, and therefore they have a salacious interest in the relationship here between Curly and Curly's wife, because it links to sex and sexuality, but also because it means they can criticize people who are in some way superior to them. Remember, Curly is the boss's son. Curly's wife is a woman. Her sexuality is threatening to them, and therefore it's something that they feel comfortable with when they criticize and when they can gossip about others. Okay, she's going to make a mess. There's going to be a bad mess about her. So here we have George and his understanding that, remember, Lenny was fascinated when he first saw Curly's wife, and he sees her as she's going to make a mess. There's going to be a bad mess about her. So he refers to her as a mess twice. So you've got the repetition of that. And again, it's she that's going to make the mess. It's not the men. It's not the other people who are involved in it. All the blame lies with her. And remember, her sexual potency is threatening to the men. And therefore, by denouncing her, by blaming her, by making her culpable, what they're doing is freeing themselves from any blame. And there's a hypocrisy about that. And he refers to her through this metaphor, folks, remember? He refers to her through this metaphor. She's a jailbait all set. So the idea that she is the one who's going to cause the trouble, not the interaction of others with her, but she is the one. And again, gives you this idea of how gendered life was at the time. It's a man's world and she has no place in it. Right, so this is in relation to old Susie's place in chapter 3. They have that idea that old Susie's place, she never talks dirty either, and my girls is clean. And what we have here is the idea that it's completely acceptable for men to go to a cat house and to use prostitutes and to pay for their services. That's perfectly fine, but it's not fine for Curly's wife to be seen as a sensual presence. It's not fine for Curly's wife to twitch her body or to speak artfully or playfully. And it links into the idea that women were seen in two different ways. There was the angel in the house, the good domestic virginal housewife. I know that sounds that you've got the paradox of a virginal housewife, but the idea that they weren't sensual beings, they weren't sexual beings. They were wives and they were mothers, they were angels, they were domesticated. And then the opposite of that, you have the whores and the tarts, who are objectified or just called whores or tarts, prostitutes, and they have their purpose as well. And you have the hypocrisy that the men can go and the men can go and pick up these girls in the cat houses as long as they don't talk dirty. So as long as they don't appear to be sexually excited by the experience, that it's a business transaction. Whereas Curly's wife, she doesn't say anything that is overtly sexual. She is just a sexual presence because of her physicality, because of her makeup, because of the way she uses her body, and yet she's judged and denounced for that. Okay, still thinking about the cat house. There's guys around here walking bow-legged because they like the look at a cutie pie doll lamp, and you give me a good whore every time, no messes. Now look at what George says, you give me a good whorehouse every time, no messes. This idea about women are linked to mess. Twice he said that Curly's wife is going to cause a mess, and here he says give me a good whorehouse every time, no messes. So you have the idea that women or connections with women are dangerous. That idea maybe that an emotional connection with a woman could be a dangerous thing, and therefore a transaction like going to a whorehouse is but a transaction. There's no emotional involved, and you get the sense that men are scared of not being in control, and whenever they're around Curly's wife, they don't feel in control because she is a potent, powerful sexual force when they're with her, and they feel that, and therefore, what do you do with something that you're scared of? Well, you attack it, and that's what they do with her when they label her and when they comment about her. So you've got this idea that you have women as objects to be used by men when men want to use them. There's no sense that a woman can control the situation. A couple of words there: misogyny, this dislike or contempt or prejudice against women, and that's what the ranch house men have. They express a misogyny that was generally felt at the time, and the dislike or the contempt for women is that idea that women could in some way be in control of them, or the power of women or the sexuality of women in some way weakens the control of a man. The fact that that Wit would even refer to her as giving even the stable buck the eye, that miscegenation there that was used to criticise Curly's wife. And finally, the objectification, the idea of degrading her to just an object. Curly's wife, always looking for him, never a name. The key thing is here, the men need to keep an emotional distance from women. Therefore, women are whores that can be used in a transaction, or they're mothers, but there can't be an emotional connection with them here at the ranch house, because the ranch house is a sterile place. It's a place where no emotion is allowed to be expressed or is allowed to continue. Okay, now in chapter 4 then, Curly's wife appears at another doorway, and this is the doorway to the harness room where Crooks is. And here, this is where Curly's wife can be seen as a really bitter force, but that bitterness is born out of isolation that we find out about in chapter 5. And it's important that we don't find about it's important that we don't find out about why she's so bitter until chapter 5, because what we do is we understand how loneliness and isolation can affect a person. And so we find her threatening, we can be critical of her in chapter 4, and then we understand her a bit more in chapter 5. And it's that understanding that's important for Steinbeck, because Steinbeck believed that when you understood a person, it would more often lead to love than to hate. And what he teaches us to do throughout this novella is not to judge without understanding, and we do understand a little bit more by the time we get to chapter 5. So the first thing that she says is they left the weak ones here. So immediately when she approaches the harness room, it's about power, that she feels that she can have power over Crooks and Candy and Lenny. They're the weak ones. She labels them as the weak ones. And then she says she's standing here talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs, a nigger, a dum-dum and a lousy sheep, and liking it because there ain't nobody else. Now, in amongst this insult is a key to her personality. It's the idea that there ain't nobody else, that she is isolated, that she is lonely. Oh, that's not very nice, is it? Hold on, see if I can rub that out. Let's see. That's better. Pick a different colour. Yeah, because there ain't nobody else. So she uses these derogatory terms. She uses a bunch of bindle stiffs. So she uses the derogatory term there. A dum-dum and a lousy sheep. So she uses these belittling metaphors. And remember, you want to think about your AO too. So she uses these belittling or reductive metaphors. Belittling or reductive metaphors. To describe the men, because it's all about power and control. That she wants to feel some sense of power. She has no power in her own life. Remember how she was suddenly apprehensive at the idea that Curly was looking for her and she wasn't in the right place. So she wants to have some sense of power, but in amongst the idea of having some sense of power, she wants to connect as well. The fact that she doesn't know how to do that, or the fact that she can only do that through being critical and being hurtful, perhaps shows that this is what she's been taught in her own life. She doesn't come into the room, remember that, but she does become a really abusive presence in chapter 4. Despite the obvious physical differences between the two characters, Crook and Candy's wife. They are kindred spirits. They are parallel characters, because they're both alone in the world. They both want company. They both want comfort. But because their lives have been bitter, because they have this emotional sterility, that they have no connection, the only thing that they can do is enjoy the sensation of projecting their pain on others. So she says they left the weak ones here because she knows that she's weak. So she projects that on others. And remember, when Lenny first came into the harness room, what did Crooks do? He insulted him. He hurt him. He did all his supposings to cause hurt and fear within Lenny's mind about what George might be up to. So both Crooks and Candy's wife, when they're first in a situation where they can actually talk to someone, what they do is they insult them because they're embittered by their lives. And then when Crooks attempts to stand up to Candy's wife, and also when Crooks attempts to, oh look, I've written Candy's wife there, Curly's wife. That's a no-no. So when Crooks attempts to stand up to Curly's wife, what she does is she cuts him right down. She emasculates him. She suggests that she could cry rape. And look, she says, listen, nigger, she says, you know what I can do if you open up your trap. She doesn't even have to say the word lynching. She doesn't have to say the word rape. It's tacit, it's understood. Look at the imperative verb, listen, as well as that terrible, terrible insult. So she needs to re-establish the power, and she does it through fear, and she does it through violence. The key thing is, none of this power is her own. She does it through the idea, the violence of what the men would do to Crooks if she were to open her mouth. So her power isn't her own. She has vicarious power. She gets power from other people, and that's another way that she's linked to her husband, because Curly has no power of his own. Curly's power comes from the fact that he is the boss's son and that he fights dirty. She's a threatening presence, as we've said before, and you have that with that opening statement. They've left the weak ones here, emasculating them, and then she states in chapter 5, she sees and understands the men's fear of being vulnerable or being exploited. You're all scared of each other, scared the rest is going to get something on you. So she knows that the men are scared just as she is. She knows that the men feel vulnerable just as she does. But there isn't an understanding between men and women here. Instead, what there is a fear. And that fear often is presented through bitterness, the bitterness of experience, and the bitterness of insulting and derogatory language and language terms. In chapter 4, when she needs to reassert power, her threatening persona is linked to her husband yet again. So like her husband, when she's attacked by Candy, so when Candy tells her to go roll her hoop, when Candy insults her, she doesn't attack Candy. Instead, she looks longest at Lenny and then commands Crooks to keep your place. So she goes for the weakest one that she can, and the weakest one in that situation is Crooks, because he has the most to lose. He's the one who's already at the bottom of the social hierarchy because of the colour of his skin. So she goes for the weakest one. She goes for Crooks, just as when Carlson and Slim confronted Curley in chapter 3, Curley did not take his anger out in Carlson or Slim. Curley took his anger out in Lenny. He looked at Lenny and then he took his anger out at Lenny. Here she looks longest at Lenny and takes her anger out on Crooks. So again, Steinbeck presents Curley and his wife as characters who've got quite a lot in common, parallel characters, because they both look to the weakest to re-establish their own sense of power. And she acts antagonistically, and look at the contempt in her when she says, listen, nigger, I could get you strung up in a tree so easy it ain't funny. And we've got the imperative verb that she uses there. She exerts her control over the one person who is the weakest, and God bless, it's per Crooks every time. And the effect upon Crooks is he becomes like a stricken animal. He drew into himself, seeming to go smaller, reduced himself to nothing. And the key thing is that her attack is so vitriolic, it's so bitter, it's so hurtful. She shows no mercy at all. And again, here you have the link between Curly's wife and Crooks, because both Curly's wife and Crooks, when they began their conversations in chapter 4, did that through insulting terms. Crooks did the same with Lenny. He attacked Lenny. He attacked what was important to Lenny, his relationship with George. He had a malicious sense of his own importance, in that he was trying to make himself feel powerful by belittling others, and that's what Curly's wife does here too. For a moment she stood over him as though waiting for him to move so she could whip at him again. Look at that metaphor, that she could whip at him, that she could beat him down with her threats and her language, that she stood over him, like goading him, wanting him to get up again so she could hit back, so she could feel that power and control. That's a great metaphor to show how much life has embittered her, that she wants to whip out at people. But then Steinbeck wants us to understand her. That's a key thing, that if you understand a person, it's more likely to lead to love than to hate. And she says to Lenny in the barn when they meet in chapter 5, you're all scared of each other. That's what. Everyone, if you're scared, the rest is going to get something on you. And she understands men. Why? Because she's in a situation where she's scared too. The reason that she understands that particular point of view is because she's in that point of view too. In many ways, the ranch house men think they have nothing in common with Curly's wife, but they have so much in common. They are isolated, they are lonely, they are in need of an emotional connection, they are scared of the lives that they're leading, they are wanting an escape, and these are things that unite the two of them. Think I don't like to talk to somebody every once in a while. Think I like to stick in this house all the time. So look at those rhetorical questions that she poses there. And again, she's using imperatives. Think, completely in a different way from the way that she used imperatives in the last slide. Remember, listen, nigger, she said. So she used imperatives there to command and control. Here she's using imperatives to try and connect. She used imperatives there to separate, and now she's using imperatives here to connect. That idea of her vulnerability too, in that she opens up to Lenny. She confides in the one man who is least likely to understand her because of Lenny's mental weakness. He's not going to be able to empathise with her. He's not going to hear what she's really saying. And here she says it very clearly. She says explicitly, I get awful lonely. How do you not like to talk to anybody? And that is her deep sadness. She is lonely. She's always on the threshold. She's always looking in. This idea of being a liminal character, always being on the threshold, never being part of the group, never being accepted, never connecting. And the fact that she asks these rhetorical questions that she doesn't get answers, even now when she has an opportunity to speak to someone, she's never going to get an answer from Lenny because of who Lenny is. I love this phrase here where Steinbeck says, and then her words tumbled out in a passion of communication, as though she hurried before her listener could be taken away. And if you think of that, her words tumbled out in a passion of communication. Just look at that verb choice, that they tumbled out, that she's never had a chance to speak freely, and now when she does, she speaks in a passion of communication. That lovely metaphor there. And what we have is the sense that she's scared of being interrupted, that she doesn't get to talk about herself, she doesn't get an opportunity to connect with anyone who'll listen, and when she does, she grabs it with both hands. In a way, it links to what Candy says about ranch life, that remember, Candy says that nobody asks any question, nobody listens, and she's learned that. So when she thinks she has an opportunity to connect, then she speaks with such passion, with such desire. And what does that passion emphasise? It emphasises how awfully lonely she is. And then her naivety. Remember what Whit said in chapter 4, have you seen the new kid? And she is just a kid, and it comes across here in how willing she was to believe in the platitudes that somebody told her. Well, I ain't told this to nobody before. So she opens up, she has this sort of confessional moment with Lenny. And remember, chapter 3 starts with George having that confessional moment with Slim, and when he looked into the godlike eyes of Slim and opened up to talk to Slim about what he did to Lenny. Now, the key thing was there, George understood that he had someone who would listen to him. He was confessing to something, knowing that there would be someone there to listen to what he said, to take on board the significance of what he said. Poor Curly's wife doesn't have that. She's confessing, yes, but not to anyone who can actually understand what she's saying. Maybe I oughtn't to. I don't like Curly, and it's so important that what are the key indicators behind her sadness? She says explicitly she knows this about herself. It's not as if she has no self-awareness. She knows that she's really lonely. She knows that she doesn't like her husband. She says these things explicitly, and yet there's nothing that she can do about them. He ain't a nice fella, and because she confided in him, she moved closer to Lenny and sat beside him. Could have been in the movies and had nice clothes, and all those nice clothes like they were. Now, we talked about her physicality and how the only thing that anyone values is how she looks, and again, that for her that's true. The first thing that she thinks about is nice clothes. I could have had nice clothes. And I could have sat in big hotels and had pictures took of me when they had in the previews. I could have went to them and spoken the radio and it wouldn't have cost me a cent. So what she wants is this glamorous lifestyle, this lifestyle of a movie star. And she thinks she could have had it. She thinks that she could have had it. And that's so sad that she has such naivety. She thinks that dream was there for the taking and it was something that she lost. And all those nice clothes like they wear, because this guy said I was a natural, and we talked about the irony of that, how everything about her is a performance and there's nothing natural about her. The only time we see her in any way shape or form as a natural is in the next few pages here when she dies, and she looks up at Lenny with a small grand gesture with her arm and her hand to show that she could act, and that tiny little wrist movement, she puts on that performance for Lenny again to show that she has some acting ability, but she has none. Instead, she believed all these things, all these platitudes, all these chat up lines that were told her that night in the that night when she met the guy who said she was a natural, and her desire to make it happen shows just how naive and how vulnerable and how innocent she is. Yes, she is that new kid. Now, the final slide looks at how she's described just after Lenny kills her. So, Curly's wife in death is freed. She's freed from the pretense. She's freed from that performance that she's given all the way through. The meanness and planning and the discontent and the ache for attention. Now that is the most important line for Curly's wife. That's all she's ever had, this ache for attention. And the only way that she could get that was by using her body. The only way that she could get that was by trying to exert some power over some people who were weaker than her. But they were all gone from her face. So life and its burdens, it was her life that made her who she was, or who she presented as, because that wasn't actually who she was. And the natural that she had been flattered by in the Riverside Dance Palace returned to her in death. She was a very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. Remember Wit says, have you seen the new kid? So there's this terrible juxtaposition between the idea that there she is lying in the hay, dead, looking sweet and young, and Candy comes in and calls her a lousy tart. He doesn't see her for who she is, but what she presented as, or what she represented to the ranch house men. They don't see her as who she is. Curly doesn't see her. No one does. The only people who can see that will be you reading the book. So there is that Sleeping Beauty analogy, that idea that she looks as if she was alive and sleeping, that if only her Prince Charming could arrive and kiss her, then all of this nasty curse of life that had burdened her for so long. Well, not even so long, because she was in her teenage years, but all of that could dispel. So we have this idea that if you can understand her, if you can understand that she was simple and sweet and young, but just so lonely with this ache for attention, that if you could understand her, then you would realise how wrong those labels are of jailbait, of tart, of lousy tart, of the mess that she's going to make. All of those labels are put upon her by others who are scared of what she represents. But what she gave to the men was what she thought they wanted, this physical, sensual presence. And what she really was a young girl who was sweet and simple and very pretty. But it was life and the ache for attention, and the fact that she was married to a man that she didn't like, and that she was so lonely, that made her appear to be the threat, the harlot, the tart, the jailbait, none of which were true. But the key thing here is Steinbeck's philosophy that if you can understand someone, you can learn to love them rather than hate them, and we can dismiss the labels that were put upon poor Curly's wife. Okay, so that's her done.